In 2021, a voluminous historical work was published on the fate of women whose lives were cut short or came to a standstill in the Nazi concentration camp Ravensbruck. The author of the book, Torn Lives, is historian Pavla Plaha, a member of the Institute for the Study of Totalitarian Regimes. The publication focused on the reasons why women were imprisoned in Ravensbruck, as well as aspects of their imprisonment that researchers have so far bypassed. These include sexual abuse by the warders and intimate relationships between women in the camp. What else have historians glossed over? You'll find out in my video. The Ravensbruck concentration camp was established at the turn of 1938 and 1939, and the main part of the camp was designed for female prisoners from the very beginning. According to the latest research, more than 13,000 women from all over Europe passed through Ravensbruck. A quarter of them did not live to see the end of the war. The concentration camp inmates were mostly Nazi opponents, wives of resistance fighters, communists, and women who had violated imperial wartime laws. Among the prisoners were thus women who were black market traders. They were also women who had expressed their disagreement with the occupation regime in public, for example, by swearing. The mistresses or girlfriends of Jews also found themselves behind bars. Among the female prisoners were also sisters of monastic orders, which was a revelation to many. This fact was not known. Along with the lack of hygiene conditions, sexual abuse or forced nudity was a very common theme in women's memories. Immediately upon arrival, they had to undress and present themselves before an admission committee. Prisoners were punished by the warders by administering body blows, which had a clearly criminal connotation. From the memoirs of Blanca Rothschild, a prisoner of the camp. In Ravensbruck, we had a hell of a time. They took away all our clothes. They made us undergo medical examinations, and it was humiliating. The word shameful doesn't fit here, because there was nothing human about the people who conducted it. They were worse than animals. Many of us were very young girls who had never been examined by a gynecologist before. We were forced to go through this. Every minute there was a humiliation. All belongings were taken away from those arriving at the camp, and they were given a striped dress, flip-flops, and a patch colored according to the category to which the prisoner belonged. Red for political and resistance prisoners, yellow for Jews, green for criminals, purple for Jehovah's Witnesses, black for gypsies, prostitutes, lesbians, and thieves. In the center of the triangle was a letter indicating nationality. Torn Lives also explores aspects of imprisonment, such as motherhood, as well as intimate relationships between women in the camp. These topics have hardly been addressed in Europe and the United States until now. If surviving documents are to be believed, the Nazis in Germany did not systematically persecute and suppress lesbians based solely on their same-sex inclinations. There were no official policies or laws prohibiting relationships between women in the Third Reich. Under the Nazis, lesbians were seen as women first and foremost. German women were assigned a special task: motherhood. According to Nazi logic, lesbians were women, and therefore could become mothers. They were obliged to give birth to racially pure Germans. However, as archival sources show, some lesbians were arrested and sent to concentration camps. For what reasons were they arrested, given that relationships between women were not criminalized in the Third Reich? The short answer is that lesbians were arrested for belonging to other groups, which included Jews, antisocial individuals, political prisoners, and professional criminals. Relationships between women were taboo in German society. The disapproval of neighbors, family members, and friends was occasionally a reason for denunciation to the police. The informers may not have known that relationships between women were not illegal. In some cases, due to lack of legal basis, police officers dismissed these complaints. However, because of the denunciation, women may have been subjected to unsolicited scrutiny. Sometimes through denunciations, police officers solved crimes. For example, They were able to find women with connections to resistance organizations, friendship with Jews, or subversive political activities. Such women were arrested and sent to concentration camps. As the example of Ellie Smula and Margaret Rosenberg illustrates, the Nazis sometimes arrested women suspected of having same-sex relationships under other pretexts. In 1940, Gestapo members detained and interrogated Ellie and Margaret. The Gestapo members claimed that their behavior interfered with the women's work at a streetcar stop in Berlin. Ellie and Margaret were accused of sabotage. They were deported to Ravensbruck concentration camp. There, both were registered as political prisoners. However, they were recorded as lesbians in camp documentation. In post-war memoirs and testimonies, some survivors described lesbian behavior in the camps as threatening the safety and well-being of the prisoners. Others saw the relationship between the two women as a sign of moral decline due to the harsh conditions in the camps. These descriptions suggest that lesbians often remained strangers to other prisoners. Notably, few lesbians self-reported their experiences in the concentration camp. This is partly because the topic of relationships between women remained taboo for decades after the fall of the Nazi regime. As in the vast majority of other large concentration camps, daily life at Ravensbruck was brutal and harsh. The endless stream of new prisoners brought the already poor food and housing to unbearable levels. Ravensbruck was a labor camp, and it was believed that all prisoners were healthy enough for a daily 12-hour work shift. Regular medical examinations excluded those unfit for the grueling work. In the first months of the camp's existence, when the number of prisoners was not yet so large, the SS established strict control over the prisoners' daily lives. Even in their free time, meetings with other prisoners were practically impossible. Still, sometimes women managed to slip away from supervision, and then, at great risk, they would read poetry aloud, talk politics, or sing. Medical experiments were also carried out in the camp. Many prisoners died during operations, while those who survived were left with scars and injuries. After the war, former prisoners testified against the medics who had experimented on them. On April 27, 1945, the Ravensbruck camp authorities ordered the evacuation. About 4,000 weakened women and children were decided to be left behind, but most of the prisoners were forced to obey the order. After some time, a column of 20,000 prisoners stopped at the outer camp of Malchow, where they were left by SS soldiers. The next day, the former camp inmates were found by Soviet troops. The years-long horrors of the Ravensbruck concentration camp had come to an end. On April 30th, 1945, the main camp was taken over by the Red Army. By May 3rd, all other Ravensbruck camps had been successfully liberated. What happened to the women who survived to liberation, whether they managed to heal from mental and physical traumas, how their lives turned out in most cases is not known. Virtually all of the women remained silent about what happened to them until the end of their lives.